My name is Cale Brogan. I run a hardware store in Sequim, and last March I found out the man who told me at my father's funeral that this town takes care of its own helped kill a 20-year-old girl. I'm not talking about the man who pulled the trigger. I mean the man who made the story stick. Her name was Maren Iverson. They said a drifter did it, a man who slept in his car and vanished 2 days after her body was found. The town exhaled, and the story closed. Except the drifter didn't run. He hanged himself in a motel a week later and left a note with 2 words: "I didn't." And the man who'd sold that story had shaken my father's hand at the funeral. He owns the marina, the council seat his grandfather held, and the room when he walks in. I should like and subscribe this channel. That's what everyone says. But what I'm going to ask is different. Over the next hour, I'm going to tell you about a 19-year-old letter my father kept in a tackle box, about a girl with a blue hair clip, and about the night I watched Fletcher do the exact same thing he did in 2008, in front of me. If you want to hear all of it, hit subscribe now, because some of this I've never said out loud, and I don't know if I can do it twice. Drop your town in the comments. Tell me what kind of place you're watching from. I want to know if it's the kind of town where everybody takes care of each other, or the kind where that phrase means something else. All right, let me take you back to the day my father died. That's where this starts, even though I didn't know it. My father's name was Donald Brogan. He ran the hardware store before me. He died on a Tuesday in October 2023. Heart. Quick. No suffering, they said. Like that's a thing anyone can know. I was the one who cleaned out his apartment above the store. It took me 4 days. I remember because I ate the same soup every night. The Campbell's minestrone he kept stocked like it was the only food on earth. And by the 4th night, I couldn't look at the can. I found the tackle box in his bedroom closet under a pile of sweaters he hadn't worn since my mother died. Green metal, rusted hinge. I thought it would have lures in it. Inside was an envelope. My father's handwriting on the front. 2 words, for Cale. And underneath it was a letter from Maren Iverson's mother, dated November 2008, addressed to my father. 3 pages handwritten, asking him to please go to the sheriff again, because she said the story about Silas Orr didn't match what Maren had told her the week before she died. I sat on my father's bed for a long time before I read it. Now, I need to back up for a second. My father and Aria Iverson, Maren's mother, grew up together. They were in the same class at Sequim High, 1973. My father took her to the prom. They stayed friends for 50 years. She used to come into the store every other Saturday just to talk to him. After Maren died, she stopped coming. I always assumed it was grief. I didn't think about it much more than that. I was 31 years old then, married. My wife was pregnant with our daughter, and Maren's death was other people's tragedy. I was sad about it. I went to the funeral, and then I kept living while that family drowned. At the funeral, Maren's, back in 2008, Fletcher Halverson stood on the porch of the Iverson house and shook my father's hand. I was standing right next to them. He said, "Donald, this town takes care of its own. We're going to make sure Aria and Warren are taken care of, whatever they need." My father didn't say anything, just nodded. I thought that was grief too. The letter in the tackle box said something different. The letter said Maren had told her mother, the weekend before she died, that a man named, and here's where Aria's handwriting got shaky, that Halverson boy had been showing up at the lavender farm when her shift ended, following her home, sitting in his truck at the end of the drive. The Halverson boy. In 2008, that was Riker Halverson, Fletcher's son. He was 22. He was at Central Washington. He came home that summer. And then there was a paragraph in Aria's letter that I read 4 times before I understood it. She said she'd gone to the sheriff herself in September 2008, after the story about Silas Orr started. She said Sheriff Carlson had listened very politely. Then he'd said, she put this in quotes, "Aria, I understand. You're a mother, but I need you to think very carefully before you say that name to anyone else." She said he was smiling when he said it. That was the part she underlined. I sat with that letter for about 2 hours. My daughter called. I didn't answer. The soup was on the stove. I didn't eat it. Then I put the letter in my truck and drove to the lavender farm on Sequim, Dungeness Way. I didn't know why. The Iversons had sold the farm in 2012. It was under new owners, some couple from Seattle. But I drove out there and I sat in my truck at the end of that driveway, and I thought about a 22-year-old man sitting in a truck at the end of that driveway 16 years ago, waiting for a girl to come home. And then a truck pulled in behind me, gray F-150. I thought it was the new owner. It wasn't. It was Fletcher Halverson. He rolled down his window and said, "Cale, you lost?" He was smiling. Same smile as the funeral porch. I need to say something about Fletcher Halverson before I go any further, because if you picture a cartoon villain in a pickup truck, you'll miss the whole thing. Fletcher is 61. He's got a full head of gray hair he keeps cut short. He wears flannel in the winter and faded canvas shirts in the summer. He coached my Little League team in 1988. He came to my wedding in 2001 and gave my wife and me a cutting board he'd made in his shop. It's still in our kitchen. He's the kind of man who knows your kids' names, who knows your dog's name, who asks about your mother's hip. When my father died, he showed up at the store with a casserole dish, a real one, made by his wife, Priscilla. And he stood there holding it, and he cried, actual tears. And he said, "Donald was one of the good ones." I don't know what to do with that. It would be easier if Fletcher was a monster, but he's not. He's a man who has done one monstrous thing and spent 16 years being kind to everyone around him, so nobody would ever need to look at that one thing. I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the driveway. He rolled down his window and asked if I was lost. I said no, I was just clearing my head. My dad had died recently. Sometimes I drove. He said, "I heard about Donald. I should have been to the service. I was up in Bellingham," which wasn't true. I'd seen him at the diner the morning of the service, but I just nodded. Then he said, "And I'm going to give you this exactly because I wrote it down when I got home." He said, "Aria Iverson still has that farm on her mind, huh? I saw her driving past here last week too. Some people can't let go of a place." And then he drove off. I sat there for another 10 minutes. He'd lied about Bellingham, and he'd connected me to Aria Iverson before I'd said her name, before I'd said anything. Okay, before I keep going, I want you to understand what Sequim is. It's a town of about 8,000 people on the north edge of the Olympic Peninsula. We're in the rain shadow, one of the driest places in western Washington, which is why the lavender grows. You can see the Strait of Juan de Fuca from the high points in town. On a clear day, you can see Victoria. There's one main street, there's one high school, there's one marina, which Fletcher owns, and there's one sheriff. Hollis Carlson retired as sheriff in 2014. His son-in-law, Eddie Delacroix, took over in 2018. Eddie and Riker Halverson played football together at Sequim High, class of 2004. Eddie was the best man at Riker's wedding in 2011. I don't say any of this to be conspiratorial. I say it because this is how towns like mine work. Everybody is connected to everybody. Most of the time, that's what makes a place good. But when one family decides one thing is going to stay buried, every connection in town becomes a reason the truth never moves. After I read Aria's letter, I did what my father hadn't done. I went to see her. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment above the pharmacy now. Warren, her husband, died in 2017. Heart, they said. I don't believe half of what this town calls a heart attack anymore, but that's another thing. She opened the door and saw me and put her hand over her mouth. She said, "Donald's boy. Oh, Donald's boy." And I said, "My dad kept your letter." She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she let me in. There's a hole in my chest when I tell this part. I'm not going to pretty it up. She made me coffee I didn't drink, and she told me that for 16 years she has been the only person in Sequim who believed her daughter was killed by Riker Halverson. 16 years. She told me about going to Sheriff Carlson. She told me about going to the county prosecutor, who called Sheriff Carlson before she'd even left the building. She told me about her own neighbor, a woman named Bonnie Rask, who stopped speaking to her at church because Aria wouldn't let Marin rest. She told me about a blue hair clip. He said Marin had a blue enamel hair clip shaped like a little leaf. Marin wore it to work every day. It was on Marin's dresser, Arya said, on the day they found her body. But the police report said the clip was found near the scene, at the edge of the river, the Dungeness River, about a quarter-mile from where Marin was found. Like Marin had been wearing it when she died, like it had fallen when she was dragged into the water. Arya said she'd told Sheriff Carlson the clip was at home. She said he told her grief does strange things to a mother's memory. I asked her if she still had the clip from her daughter's dresser. She got up and went into her bedroom and came back with a shoebox. Inside the shoebox was a small blue enamel hair clip, a little leaf curled at the edges. It had been on her bedroom dresser for 16 years. Before I tell you what I did with that clip, I want to stop for a second. There's a feeling I had sitting at Arya's kitchen table that I want you to understand, because I think a lot of you have had it. It's the feeling of being the last person in a room to find out about a thing that everyone else has already agreed not to talk about. I'd lived in this town my whole life. I knew Fletcher. I knew Hollis Carlson. I knew Eddie. I knew Bonnie Rask from church. I had sold roofing nails to every one of them, and I'd shaken their hands at my father's funeral 3 weeks earlier. And every single one of them had looked me in the eye and said nice things, and every single one of them had known this. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found out that the people you thought were your people had an agreement you weren't part of? Not a friend lying to you. I mean, a whole community, a town, a family, a workplace, an agreement about what gets said and what doesn't. If you have, I want to hear about it in the comments. Not the dramatic version, the quiet version, the way it actually felt the moment you realized. Because I didn't know what to do with the feeling, and I still don't. And reading other people's versions is the closest thing to company I've got. And what I'm about to tell you, the clip, and what I did with it, and what Fletcher did next. That's the part where this stops being a story I'm piecing together, and starts being a story where somebody decides, I need to stop. All right. Back to Arya's kitchen. I told her I wanted to go to the police. She laughed, not a cruel laugh, a tired one. She said, "Which police, Cale? There's one sheriff's office in this county. There's one prosecutor. There's nobody above them except the state, and the state doesn't answer letters from a 67-year-old woman in a town they've never heard of." I said, "What if I take it to the state?" She said, "Then Fletcher is going to hear about it before they do." She was right. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I took the hair clip with me. Arya wrapped it in a piece of paper towel and put it in a Ziploc bag and said, "Don't lose this. It's all I have left of her that's still real." I drove it home, and I sat in my kitchen, and I looked at a blue enamel leaf the size of my thumb, and I thought about a girl I'd seen maybe 4 or 5 times in her whole life. A girl who bagged my groceries the summer she was 16, because she had a second job at the Safeway on top of the lavender farm. And I thought about the fact that this little piece of enamel was the thing that was going to either bring a town down or sit in a shoebox for another 16 years. I put it in my gun safe. I have a gun safe because my father gave me his service pistol when I turned 40. I'd never loaded it. I put the hair clip on top of the pistol. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I did nothing. For 3 weeks, I did nothing. I went to work. I sold bolts and saw blades. I watched Fletcher come in on a Tuesday and buy a 5-gallon bucket of roofing tar, and he said, "How you doing, Cale? Hanging in there?" And I said, "Yeah, Fletcher, one day at a time." And I rang up his purchase, and I took his money. He tipped me $1, which is a thing Fletcher does. $1 tip at a hardware store, like you're at a diner. After he left, I went into the bathroom and I threw up. The first thing that happened was my store got broken into. It was November 14th, a Thursday. I came in at 6:45 a.m. like I always do, and the back door was open. Not kicked in, open, like somebody had walked out and forgot to close it. Nothing was taken, the register was full. The tools were on the wall. The back office where I keep the safe had not been touched. The safe was locked. The desk was exactly how I left it, except my father's old logbook was on the desk. My father kept a logbook from 1994 to 2022, with every significant conversation he had with the customer. Not transactions, conversations. Which guys were having marriage trouble, whose son got into what college, who was putting a new roof on because their old one blew off in a windstorm. He said it was how he remembered people. I called it his gossip Bible. He called it being a good neighbor. I hadn't touched the logbook since he died. It lived on a shelf in the office, spine out, dust on the top. That morning it was on the desk, open, to a page dated March 17th, 2009. The entry said, "Aria came by, crying. Said she thinks the sheriff is lying. I told her I'd see what I could find out. I don't know what I can find out. I'm going to ask around." There was a note scrawled in the margin, in my father's handwriting, dated 2 weeks later. Fletcher came in. Said if I cared about my family, I wouldn't ask questions I wouldn't like the answer to. Said he meant my family, not his. I am 54 years old and a man just threatened my son to my face, and I didn't say a word because my son was 2 stores down. I am ashamed. My son. That's me. I stood in that office for 20 minutes reading that paragraph. Whoever came in that night had read it too. They'd opened it to that page on purpose. They'd left it there for me to see. It wasn't a burglary. It was a message. The message was, "We know you know, and we know what your father knew, and your father stayed quiet, so you will too." I called the sheriff's office. Not because I expected Eddie Delacroix to solve it, because I wanted a record. I wanted it on paper somewhere. Eddie came out himself, which I found interesting. A broken-into hardware store with no theft doesn't usually pull the actual sheriff. He walked around the store. He looked at the back door. He asked what was missing. I said nothing. He asked if I'd had any recent disputes with anyone. I said no. He said, "Well, that's relief, I guess. Probably kids." He didn't file a report. He said he'd have a deputy come by if I wanted an official one, but it didn't seem worth the paperwork. Before he left, he stopped at the door and he said, "This is exact. Your dad did a lot of good in this town, Cale. A lot of people loved him. You've got a good thing going here. I'd hate for anything to get in the way of that." It was a beautiful thing to say. Warm, almost. You could put it on a plaque. I wrote it down in my truck afterwards. That was the first threat. I didn't even hear it as one the first time. That's the problem with this kind of threat. It sounds exactly like kindness. It's only later, when you replay it, that you hear the other thing underneath. I was still telling myself a version where everything could be fine, where maybe I'd been reading too much into Aria's letter, where maybe the break-in was kids. I'd run a small business for 19 years. I had a wife, a daughter in her second year at UW, a dog named Barnaby, and a mortgage. I wasn't a journalist. I wasn't a detective. What I was scared. And for 3 more weeks after the break-in, I did nothing again. I moved the hair clip from the safe to a lockbox in my truck. Because I'd started to worry about the safe, I stopped going to the diner. I started closing the store at 5:45 instead of 6. I didn't tell my wife anything, which is a thing I still don't know how to forgive myself for. And Marin's name was in a logbook on my desk, and a hair clip was in my truck, and I was doing nothing about either of them. Before this goes further, pause with me for a second. If you've been in this spot where you know a thing and you haven't done a thing, I'm not asking you to judge me. I'm asking you to remember what it felt like. If you'd like, drop it in the comments. Not to confess, just to say you know what I mean. Because the next piece of this is when I stopped being able to stay quiet. And it wasn't because I found new evidence. It was because I saw Fletcher do it again. In late January, I went to the Halversons' winter open house at the marina. I know how that sounds. You'd think after everything I'd be nowhere near that man, but it's a town of 8,000 people. The marina does a thing every January where they open the boat barn and serve chili and people donate to the volunteer fire department. I'd gone every year for 19 years. I'd donated. My dad had donated. If I hadn't shown up, Fletcher would have known exactly why. So I went. I wore the coat my dad used to wear. I brought $100 cash for the donation jar. I shook Fletcher's hand. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Attaboy, Cale. Good to see you out." Priscilla, his wife, hugged me. She smelled like cinnamon because she'd been baking all morning. I ate chili out of a styrofoam cup, and I stood by the wood stove and I watched. Riker Halverson was there. He's 38 now, lives in Port Townsend, does something with boat insurance. He had his wife with him and their 2 kids, and he worked the room, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, the whole thing. He hugged me. He said, "Cale, man, I was so sorry to hear about your dad. He was a great guy." And then I watched Riker with a girl who worked behind the donation table. Her name was Lila Pruitt. I knew her because her mother Marguerite buys light bulbs from me. Lila was 19, a freshman at Peninsula College, home for the weekend. Riker leaned on the donation table with both hands, and he talked to her for about 40 minutes. I watched from across the room. She laughed politely, the way a 19-year-old laughs at a married 38-year-old man who owns a piece of the marina, because she doesn't know how to end the conversation. At one point, Riker reached across the table and tucked Lila's hair behind her ear. She froze, just for a second. Then she smiled again. And here's the part I want you to sit with. Fletcher was standing 12 feet away. Fletcher Halverson, 61 years old, watched his son do that. Fletcher's face did not change. He took a sip of coffee. He turned back to the man he was talking to. He smiled at something the man said. I watched Fletcher not react, and I remember thinking very clearly, he's seen this before. He's seen his son do this before. Not just in 2008. He has seen this many times, and every time he has done what he's doing right now, which is nothing. Something came loose in me watching Fletcher not react. The hair clip and the lockbox in my truck was not going to stay there. I left early. I told Priscilla I wasn't feeling well. She said, "Oh, honey, you've had such a rough fall. Give yourself time." She hugged me again. She meant every word. That was the part that was hardest. These were not bad people playing at being good. These were good people protecting a bad person, and they had been doing it so long they couldn't feel the difference anymore. In my truck in the parking lot, I watched Lila Pruitt come out. Her mother picked her up. Before she got in the car, she looked back at the marina once, quick, and I saw her face. She was 16 kinds of uncomfortable. 19 years old, trying to figure out if what had just happened had been a thing or nothing. I want to tell you what happened next, because this is where something changed in me that I can't explain fully. It wasn't courage. I'm not casting myself as brave. It was more like I'd been holding my breath for 3 months, and looking at Lila Pruitt's face was the moment I realized I was going to suffocate if I didn't let it out. I drove home and I called Aria. I said, "I think we have to go to the state. I don't know how, but I think we have to." She said, "Cale, listen to me. You go to the state, he will find out. You need somebody who doesn't live here. You need a reporter. You need somebody Fletcher can't call." I said, "Do you know any reporters?" She said, "My sister does." Aria's sister is named Rosemary Iverson Kell. She's a retired copy editor who lives in Tacoma. Aria called her the next morning. Rosemary called me that afternoon, and Rosemary gave me the phone number of a woman named Jules McCarris. Jules McCarris is 42, a freelance investigative reporter based in Seattle who used to work at the Seattle Times. She does cold cases. Rosemary had met her at a library fundraiser 2 years before. I called Jules that night. It took her 10 minutes of listening before she said, "How soon can I come up?" I said, "Tomorrow." She said, "I'll be there Wednesday." Jules showed up on a Wednesday afternoon in a rental Subaru with a notebook and a small recorder and a duffel bag. She rented a cabin outside of town for cash. She told me not to call her from my cell phone. She told me not to save her number in my phone. She told me not to tell Aria she was meeting her at the library. She said, "If anyone in this town sees me with you twice, we're done." Before I tell you what Jules found, and she found things I wasn't ready for, I want to pause, because I think some of you right now are already deciding what you would do if you were me. Some of you are thinking you would have gone to the state on day 1. Some of you are thinking you would have minded your own business. Some of you are thinking you would have just left town. I'm not asking you to grade my decisions. I'm asking what you really would have done, not what you want to believe. What you actually would have done if you ran a hardware store in a town where everybody knew everybody. Drop it in the comments. I read them, I promise. Because what Jules found, it got worse. It got worse in a way I want you here for.
Jules stayed for 9 days.
In 9 days, she did what the Sequim Sheriff's Department did not do in 16 years. She didn't do it because she was smarter. She did it because she was not from Sequim. On day 3, she found the coroner who signed Maren Iverson's autopsy. His name was Dr. Warwick Theda. He'd retired in 2011 and moved to Arizona. Jules called him from a burner phone. She told him she was doing a piece on small-town forensics. He talked for 45 minutes. She recorded the whole thing with his permission. He said the autopsy had been completed by a deputy coroner named Orla Shanks. He said he had signed off on it without reviewing it personally, which he called, quote, a failure of my office, not of Orla. He said there had been a ligature mark on Maren's neck that was inconsistent with the cause of death on the report, which was listed as drowning. He said at the time he'd made a note in his own private file questioning the ligature mark. He said Sheriff Carlson had visited him 2 days after the body was found. He said Carlson had told him there was a clean scenario with the drifter and that the family needed closure. He said he'd been 41 years old, 4 years into a job he didn't want to lose, and he'd signed the report. He said at the end, I have thought about that girl every day for 15 years. Every day. Do you understand? Jules played me the recording in the rental cabin. I sat on a couch that smelled like somebody else's dog, and I listened to a 77-year-old man in Arizona cry. On day 5, Jules found Orla Shanks. She still worked at the county morgue. She was 63 years old and 2 years from retirement. Jules went to see her in person. Orla didn't want to talk. Jules waited in the parking lot at the end of Orla's shift. Orla walked past her 3 times. On the 3rd pass, Orla stopped. She said without looking at Jules, the hair clip wasn't at the scene. I put it there in the photograph. Carlson brought it to me in an evidence bag. He said it had been found in the grass that morning. I processed it as if it had been. Then she kept walking. Jules caught up to her and asked if she would say that on the record. Orla said, I have a mortgage. I have a son in Spokane who I pay rent for. I have 2 years until I can retire. She said, if you put my name on this, I will deny it and I will be fine, and you will have nothing. Jules said she understood. Orla got in her car. Jules watched her sit in the driver's seat for about a minute without starting it. Then Orla rolled down the window and said, put a note in the file that says, verified by phone with morgue tech, and I will not call to correct it. Then she drove away. On day 7, Jules found the motel clerk in Port Angeles, who had checked Silas Orr in the night before his suicide. She was named Nadia Frazier. She was 58 now. She'd been 39 in 2008. Nadia told Jules that Silas Orr had checked in at 9 p.m., that he'd paid cash, that he'd been calm, polite, asked if there was a payphone, that at 10:15 p.m. a man had come to the front desk asking which room Silas Orr was in. Nadia had asked if he was a friend. The man had said he was the father of a girl Silas had hurt, and he wanted to have a conversation. Nadia had refused to give him the room. The man had walked out. Silas Orr was found the next morning. The motel had no security cameras in 2008. Nadia described the man, 6'1", gray blonde hair, green jacket, early 40s. Fletcher Halverson in 2008 was 45, 6'1", grayish blonde hair. He owned a green Filson jacket that I had seen him wear every winter of my life. Maren Iverson's father, Warren Iverson, in 2008 was 62 and 5'7". The man at that motel was not Maren's father. I don't know exactly what Fletcher did or said at that motel. I don't know if he talked Silas Orr into the rope or handed it to him. I don't know if Silas hanged himself out of shame for a crime he didn't commit or out of terror of a man who had come to find him. I will never know. Silas Orr is 16 years dead, and he died believing a town blamed him, and his last 2 words were, I didn't, and that is the thing I think about when I cannot sleep at night. Jules came back to the cabin that night, and I could tell by her face before she spoke. She sat down on the couch and she said, Cale, this is no longer a story about a girl who got killed. This is a story about a girl who got killed, and a drifter who got killed, and 16 years of a man doing whatever he needs to do to keep that in the ground. I need you to be ready for what this is. I said I was ready. I wasn't, but I said it. Before the next piece, if this story is hitting you, hit the like button really quick while we're here. It's going to help more people find it, and I think more people need to hear this one. Thank you.
I want to slow down here because what came before and what comes after feel like two different months of my life, even though they were the same one. Up to now, I have been describing a slow suffocation. 3 months of small signs. A letter, a clip, a break-in, a threat in a logbook, a smile at a party, a sheriff who doesn't file paperwork. You have been with me in that suffocation. I hope you have, because the next part happens fast and I need you close. Jules and I spent the next 2 days preparing what she called a package, a real one, paper, digital backup, 3 copies. She had decided the story would not go to the Seattle Times. She said that would take weeks. She had a friend at the Washington State Patrol's Criminal Investigation Division who she trusted, a woman named Detective Janet Akers. And Jules wanted to hand the package directly to Detective Akers in Olympia on a Monday morning. This was a Friday. We were going to leave Sunday night. Saturday afternoon, I was at my store. It was early February. There was snow on the Olympics and none in town. Fletcher came in at about 2 in the afternoon. He was buying a roll of plastic sheeting and a box of nails. He stood at my counter and he paid and he said, "Cale, I was wondering if you could come by the marina tomorrow afternoon around 4. I want to talk to you about something." I said, "What's it about, Fletcher?" He said, "Your dad. I want to show you something of his." And he smiled. Let me tell you what I did. I called Jules. She said, "Don't go." I said, "I'm going to go." She said, "Cale, please." I said, "If I don't go, he knows. If I go, he thinks I'm still playing along." We leave Sunday night. I go at 4. I'm home by 5. We leave at 8. She said, "Fine." She said she would be at the end of the road the marina sits on in a rental Subaru in plain view from 3:30 p.m. onward. She said if I wasn't out by 4:45, she was calling the State Patrol directly. She said, "Don't bring your phone. Bring a second phone I had set up with her number and nothing else." I brought the second phone. I also brought, in the lockbox in my truck, the blue hair clip. I don't know why. I think I brought it because I didn't trust myself to leave it at home. I think I brought it because some part of me had decided that if this was going to be the day, it was going to be the day, and I wanted Marin with me. That's the closest to brave I think I have ever been, and it was a pretty small kind of brave. Before I tell you what happened in that boat barn, I want to ask you something, because I know a lot of you are about to hear this next part and wish I had turned the truck around. Would you have gone? I don't mean the clean answer, the one where you say, "Of course you wouldn't." I mean the real one, the one you'd only tell yourself at 2 in the morning. Would you have driven to the marina to sit across a desk from a man who already knew your daughter's name? Tell me in the comments. I'm going to need company for what comes next. I drove to the marina at 3:55 p.m. Fletcher was waiting for me in the boat barn. Priscilla was not there. Nobody was there. The marina had closed at 3 on Saturdays in the off-season for as long as I could remember. The boat barn is a long metal building with concrete floor and fluorescent lights and the smell of diesel and fiberglass. There's a small office in the back corner with a desk and 2 chairs and a window that looks out on the water. Fletcher was in that office. He stood up when I came in. He smiled. He said, "Cale, thanks for coming." He poured coffee into 2 mugs. He handed me one. He said, "I hear you've had a visitor lately. Woman from Seattle, staying in that cabin out by Happy Valley." I set the coffee down. He said, "Small town, son. Eddie mentioned it. Her rental came up on his screen. Just routine." I didn't say anything. He said, "I want you to understand something. I loved your father, I really did. Your father was a good man who knew when to stay out of other people's business. That was one of the things I loved about him." He sat down. He gestured for me to sit. I sat. He said, "Your daughter, Cale. She's up at UW. What's her name again? Tessa?" My daughter's name is Tessa. I had never told Fletcher my daughter's name. He said, "Bright girl. She got into UW, what, a year and a half ago?" I read it in the little notes at the back of the church bulletin. Priscilla keeps up with those. Anyway, I hear Seattle's rough these days. A lot of things happen to girls walking home at night. He said it the way you tell a story about the weather. I felt the coffee mug get warm against my palm. I did not say a word. I don't think I was breathing.
He said, "Your father stayed out of things he didn't need to be in, Cale. He lived a long life, your mother too. You've got a wife, a kid, a business. You've got a good life. I'm asking you, man to man, the way your father and I used to talk, to keep living it. And then he did something I have replayed in my head about 1,000 times. He reached into his desk drawer and he pulled out a folder. He put it on the desk between us. He said, "I know about the letter. I know about the clip. I know your father knew. Your father made the right call, Cale. I'm asking you to make the same one." Inside the folder were photographs of me, of my store, of my wife, of my daughter, at UW, on a street in the U District, of my house from the road, of the back of my truck. The truck photograph had been taken that morning. There was snow on my truck bed that had fallen overnight. I could see the exact pattern of it. Sitting in that office with that folder on the desk, I understood, fully, that I was not going to be able to do this. I was going to go home. I was going to tell Jules it was off. I was going to give her the hair clip and a Ziploc bag and let her do whatever she could from Seattle. And I was going to be a man who lived the rest of his life in Sequim with a daughter in Seattle and a wife who would never know why I suddenly didn't want to drive past the marina anymore. That is what I was thinking when the side door of the boat barn office opened and Lila Pruitt walked in. She was wearing a black jacket and jeans. She was holding a plate wrapped in tinfoil. She said, "Mr. Halverson, my mom said to drop these off. She made the banana bread you asked about?" She stopped when she saw me. Fletcher's face did something I cannot describe. It went from the face he had been showing me, the calm, threatening face, to a completely different face, a warm face, in the time it takes to blink. He stood up. He said, "Lila, honey, come in. Put it on the desk. Thank your mother for me." Lila walked in. She put the banana bread on the desk. She said, "My mom said she's so sorry she couldn't bring it herself. She had to take my grandma to a doctor." Fletcher walked around the desk. He put his hand on the small of Lila Pruitt's back and he said, "You are such a sweetheart. Your mother is so lucky to have you." Lila went rigid, just like at the chili party. And I want to tell you this exactly because this is the moment the story turned in my chest and I want you there with me. I saw Fletcher Halverson's hand on the small of a 19-year-old girl's back, and I saw his face, and I thought about a folder of photographs of my own daughter, and I thought about Maren Iverson's blue enamel hair clip, which was in a lockbox in my truck in this marina parking lot. And I thought, you don't get to keep doing this. You don't get to keep doing this because I'm afraid. A town is only as safe as the one person in it who won't look away. I stood up. I said, "Lila?" She turned. Fletcher's hand stayed on her back for one more second. Then it moved. I said, "Lila, can you do me a favor and stand by the door for a minute? I need to say something to Fletcher and I want you to hear it." Fletcher said, "Cale, what are you—" I said, "Fletcher, your son killed Maren Iverson in 2008. You drove a drifter to a motel in Port Angeles a week later and you did something, I don't know what, but you did something, and that boy hanged himself. You had Hollis Carlson bury the case. You had a 63-year-old woman lie about a hair clip, and you have just put your hand on a 19-year-old girl's back, who I have watched your son circle for an entire evening, and you have just threatened my daughter." Lila Pruitt's mouth was open. Fletcher said, "Cale, you need to sit down and listen to—" I said, "Lila, your mom ever tell you about a girl named Maren Iverson?" Lila's face. Her face. She said, "She was my babysitter when I was 3. And I turned to Fletcher and I said, "That's why I'm not sitting down. I want to tell you what I expected to happen. I expected Fletcher to threaten me more. I expected him to physically stand in the doorway. I expected, honestly, the possibility that I would not leave that boat barn alive, because I was in a room alone with a man who had, I was now sure, been present at the death of at least 2 people. What actually happened was Lila Pruitt took her phone out of her back pocket. She had started recording the second I said Maren Iverson's name. She told me afterwards that she didn't know why. She said, his hand was still there, you know? And then you said her name and I just hit record." She stood in the doorway of Fletcher's office and recorded for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She recorded Fletcher calling her sweetheart. She recorded Fletcher saying to me, "You don't know what you're talking about. You're grieving. You've lost your father. This town will take care of you." She recorded him saying, when I mentioned the folder of photographs, "Those are not what you think they are, Cale." She recorded the folder. Then she backed out of the office and she ran. She ran to the marina parking lot and she got into her mom's car, which she had driven, and she drove out of the parking lot so fast I could hear her tires on the gravel from inside. Fletcher and I were alone again. He looked at me. He said, very quietly, "You have no idea what you've just done." I said, "Neither do you." I walked out. I walked past the boat barn. I got into my truck. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my keys twice, trying to get them into the ignition. Jules was at the end of the road in the rental Subaru. She saw my face. She followed me home. Lila Pruitt's video, I learned later, was sent to her mother Marguerite at 4:47 p.m. that afternoon. Marguerite Pruitt watched it. She watched it twice. Then she called Jules. Jules's name was in Lila's contacts because I had given Lila Jules's number in the parking lot of the marina through my truck window, which is the only smart thing I did that entire day. Marguerite said to Jules, "What do I do with this?" Jules said, "Send it to me, right now." By midnight on Saturday, February, I can never remember the exact date, and I don't want to guess, Jules McCarris had the video. The full audio file of Dr. Warwick Theta from Arizona, the autopsy file discrepancies, Aria Iverson's original 2008 letter, the blue hair clip in a sealed evidence bag, and a statement from Nadia Frazier. She had a second set of everything in a locked file in her rental cabin, and a third set she had emailed to her editor at 11:58 p.m. Before she drove to Olympia on Sunday morning, not Monday, she moved it up. She did one more thing. She called Detective Janet Akers at home. She told her the whole story in 18 minutes. Detective Akers told Jules to drive directly to Olympia and not to her home address. Detective Akers said something else, too, which I didn't learn until later. She said, "Don't tell the local sheriff. Don't tell the county. This one I want to handle state only." Sunday was a quiet day. I went to work. I actually went to work. I don't know why. I think I needed to be around bolts and saw blades. And I closed early. I went home. I told my wife everything. I told her everything for about 2 hours while she sat across from me at the kitchen table. She did not cry. She held my hand. She said, "I always knew something was wrong with that man." She said, "Cale, you should have told me." I said, "I know." She said, "We're going to talk about that part later." That was Sunday. Monday morning at 8:45 a.m., Washington State Patrol Detective Janet Akers and 2 other investigators arrived at the Halverson Marina with a warrant for the marina office, the Halverson residence, and a cabin the family owned on Lake Sutherland. At 11:15 a.m., they executed a separate warrant on Sheriff's Deputy Hollis Carlson, retired, at his home on Woodcock Road. At 12:40 p.m., Riker Halverson was picked up at his office in Port Townsend. Fletcher Halverson was arrested at the marina at 9:12 a.m. He was charged, eventually, with tampering with physical evidence, witness intimidation, accessory after the fact to second-degree murder, and a charge related to the death of Silas Orr that I still don't fully understand, but which Detective Akers called the important one. Riker Halverson was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Marin Iverson. Hollis Carlson was charged with obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and accessory after the fact. Eddie Delacroix, the current sheriff, was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a separate investigation. His involvement, as of this recording, is still under review. That is a lot of words I just said in a row. I want to slow down and say them in a way you can feel. Marin Iverson was killed by Riker Halverson in the summer of 2008. Silas Orr did not do it. Silas Orr was made to look like he did it, because this town decided a dead drifter was a cheaper sacrifice than a Halverson's son. 2 people died, and for 16 years this town called that a closed case. Fletcher Halverson made that happen, and Fletcher Halverson was arrested in the marina he inherited from his grandfather at 9:12 a.m. on a Monday in February, 16 years late, because a 19-year-old girl with a plate of banana bread had the presence of mind to hit record. I want to tell you what happened after. and I want to be honest about the fact that it has not been what I expected. I think, that the town would crack open, that people would show up on Aria Iverson's doorstep with flowers, that Maureen's name would be cleared publicly and loudly, that the hardware store would be full of people wanting to shake my hand. Some of that happened, not most of it. What mostly happened was silence. A lot of people in this town who had been coming to my store for 20 years stopped. Not dramatically, just they started going to the Ace Hardware out toward Carlsborg. I noticed it in February, more in March, a lot in April. My sales dropped by about 18% in the first quarter after the arrests. I'm not going to go under, but I lost some friendships I didn't know I had until I lost them. Priscilla Halverson sent me a handwritten letter about 6 weeks after Fletcher's arrest. I'm not going to read it on this podcast because some of it is hers, but the last line was, "I hope you understand what you have done to a family that loved you." I have read that line probably 40 times, and I still do not know what to do with it. I don't think Priscilla knew what her husband and her son had done. I also don't know if that matters. Bonnie Rask, the woman who stopped speaking to Aria at church, showed up at Aria's apartment in March with a pound cake and a card. Aria told me about it. Aria said she took the pound cake and she thanked Bonnie for coming, and then she closed the door and she threw the pound cake out. She said, "I don't want her cake. I want my daughter." I hope that is the last thing I have to say about Bonnie Rask. Lila Pruitt. I need to tell you about Lila Pruitt because I am not going to let this ending hinge on me. Lila testified at Fletcher's arraignment. She is going back to school in the fall, her mother tells me. She took the spring off. She did not want to be in town. She and her mother drove to her aunt's in Boise for 2 months. When she came back, she came to the store. She bought a pack of picture-hanging hooks. She didn't need to. She just wanted to come by. She said, "Mr. Brogan, I want to say thank you, and I want to say I'm sorry, for my part." I said, "Lila, honey, you don't have a part to apologize for." She said, "I had a part. I just didn't know what it was yet." That sentence has stayed with me. Aria Iverson moved, not far. She bought a small house in Port Townsend with money from a civil settlement I don't think I'm allowed to talk about. She invited me to her housewarming. Rosemary was there. Jules was there. Jules and I are still in touch, though less than we used to be. Aria had a picture of Marin on the wall, and underneath it she had framed a copy of the page from my father's logbook, the page with the March 17th, 2009 entry, and my father's note in the margin. She said, "Your father tried, Cale. He failed, but he tried." She said, "It took 2 of you Brogans to get there, but you got there." I cried. I sat on her porch with my wife and I cried for a long time. Aria sat next to me and she held my hand. This is a thing I would not have believed in February, that Aria Iverson, who had waited 16 years for someone to listen, would be the one comforting me. But that's what she did. That's who she is. My father kept a letter in a tackle box for 14 years and never did anything about it. I want you to think about that for a second. And I want you to think about what he did do. He kept the letter. He could have burned it. He could have given it back to Aria. He could have pretended Aria had never come into his store that March morning. He did not. He kept the letter, and he labeled the envelope with my name, and he put it where he knew I would find it. My father was a coward, and my father was a hero. And those 2 things were the same man. I want that to be true of me, too. I hope it is. Fletcher's trial was last month. Hollis Carlson took a plea. Fletcher was convicted on 3 of the 4 charges. He will serve, and I say this plainly because I want Marin's name in the same sentence as this. He will serve at least 11 years. Riker's trial is in January. Riker's outcome is not mine to predict. I'll be at both sentencings either way. It's the morning of an October Tuesday, almost a year to the day since my father died. I woke up at 6:15 a.m. My wife was already up. The coffee was on. The dog was asleep on my feet. He does that now. I used to get mad about it. I don't anymore. I got up. I made myself a piece of toast. I stood in my kitchen and I looked out the window at the yard. There's a bird feeder my wife put up in April. There are 2 finches on it. I drove to the store. I unlocked the back door at 6:42 a.m. I flipped the lights. I started the coffee in the break room. I want to thank you for staying this long. This has been hard to say out loud, and I didn't know when I started if I could get through it. If this story reached you, if you're still here, it would mean a lot if you'd go ahead and subscribe and tap like, and maybe share this with somebody you know from a town like mine. There are a lot of towns like mine. I think stories like this find the people who need them when they need them, and that's the only reason I decided to tell it this way instead of in a courtroom document nobody reads. And if you've got your own version of this, not the case, I don't mean the case, I mean the quiet version, the one where you knew a thing and didn't know what to do with it, or you found out a person you loved had done a thing you couldn't reconcile, I'd really like to hear it in the comments. Not to compare, just to know. I read them. I told you I would. I am. I don't have a big lesson for you. I'm not going to pretend I do. A 20-year-old girl named Maren Iverson had her whole life ahead of her, and a man killed her and a town buried that. And it took a letter in a tackle box and a 19-year-old girl with a phone to move any of it. That is not a clean story. I do not know how to make it clean. I do know her name, Maren Iverson, and I am going to say it out loud every time I have a chance to, for as long as I'm around to say it. It's 8:03 a.m. The bell on the front door just went. Somebody needs a bolt, probably, or a bag of mulch. I'm going to go help them. Cale Brogan, Washington Street, Sequim. Thanks for listening.